Claudia Coco, Channel 3, Chattanooga and Coco, COCO. I had us walking into the witness chamber at 6:56. The spiritual advisor walked into the room as well. He started speaking with the brother in the front row. The brother asked if he was okay, and the spiritual advisor actually answered him in this conversation. He said he enjoyed his last meal. They laughed and they cried. Apparently, Lee Hall offered to share his last meal with the spiritual advisor. And then at that time, we could only see light through a small crack in the door and the light off of the phone in the room. The spiritual advisor also said that Paul was going to say the Lord's Prayer when they put the veil over his head. Around 7:01, I could hear the corrections radio going off, and we heard some doors shut. The room's really small. There's about 4 viewing windows. There's 3 rows of 5 chairs, 4 speakers in the room. We heard more opening and closing of doors. There was one really loud slam, and we could hear voices, but they were very muffled. At 7:07, I heard something like shackles coming off and some coughing and more clips, and sometimes it sounded like snaps, and it made sense once the curtain came up because the straps almost look like airplane belt buckles, and then one in the middle looks like a child's car seat buckle. Again, we heard a woman's voice at one point and muffled voices at 7:10. Curtain was still down at 7:11, but we could still hear the radio going. At 7:12, the attorneys walked into the room, heard another noise, wasn't sure, but at 7:13, the curtain raised and we saw Lee Hall. He was completely shaved. He was looking around, wasn't focusing in on anything in particular. At one point, he had his eyes closed and his head was leaning back against the chair. At that point, they did 2 sound checks because the speakers weren't working in the room. And then at that point, the warden at 7:14 asked, "Do you have any last words?" He did ask for a cup. He said, "I can't talk. Can I have a cup of water?" And the warden again said, "Do you have any last words?" And I had, people can learn hope, forgiveness, and love, and can make this world a better place. At 7:15, the soaked sponge, they started squeezing it over his head. It was a really large sponge. It was around his head, a little bit wider than his head, and it looked at some point through the water. He was trying to breathe through his mouth, and his head was kind of down, and his chin was closer to his chest. And at 7:16, they strapped the chin strap on. His hands were relaxed, and they put the veil over his face at 7:16. At 7:17, they started using the water bottles to soak the sponges at his ankles, and they started taking the rubber mats away and wiping down the floor. Those guards left, and then there was only 3 people left in the room at that point. The exhaust fan turned on, and at 7:18, before that, the cord was plugged into the chair, and at 7:18, the first current went through. His body raised up, his hands clenched into fists. That jolt went for about 20 seconds, and then his whole body relaxed and sagged into the chair. It was in that period of downtime I noticed that his shirt was just soaking wet. It was a white cotton shirt. Then the second current went through it at 7:19. I did notice smoke both times from the right side of his head. His hands relaxed. Now, at that point, after the second current, I noticed that his hands were so red they were almost purple. The men in the room were staring ahead. You could kind of see Hall's head sagging to the side. We kind of waited for a minute. One of the men in the room was staring at Hall's ankles or feet. He was looking down towards Hall. They all looked very somber and solemn. At 7:23, the curtain lowered and we heard clicking. And at 7:26, the exhaust fan went off and we heard the time of death get called at 7:26. And then we waited in the room for a few more minutes. And then we were let out.
So you would classify this as smoke as well?
I don't know if it was, I'm not at liberty to say if it was smoke or vapor or anything like that, but it was some sort of smokish like thing coming from his head.
Do you have any idea like how long it lasted, like a second?
It was several seconds. It happened, I would say midway through each current, but I noticed the smoke, water vapor-ish type every time. So.
Any signs of distress, discomfort, anything that accompanied that last smoke or steam?
No, he was very securely, he was very secure in the chair. His body sagged, completely relaxed each time.
Movement after the first time the current was turned off?
No, his fists were clenched in the current, and then they kind of relaxed. His two fingers, his index finger, his middle finger, kind of relaxed with it, but no movement after the first current and no movement after the second.
So you heard the spiritual advisor in the room that all offered to share his final meal with that gentleman. Can you express in what sense that was shared?
They seemed, the spiritual advisor seemed like the last few hours with Hall were peaceful, at most laughed and cried. I think it was meant as a emotion of goodwill. He couldn't eat any of his final meal. So that was a conversation between the spiritual advisor and the brother at that point.
So that, he also added that he had planned to say the Lord's Prayer when the veil was placed over his head. Was there any way for you to tell if Paul was able to do that?
There was no way to tell.
Was there any change in Paul's demeanor throughout this ordeal?
At one point when he said, the second time he asked, do you have any last words, he kind of went, and that was it. That was the only thing that really I would say would be a change in demeanor.
Did you see emotion either with the gentlemen that were in the chamber with him or the people that were in the room?
They were all very somber and serious and stone-faced, I would say.